Now it's Elizabeth Warren who's taking the lead on raising the minimum wage. Take a look at Senator Warren at last week's hearing of the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions.
So I was very intrigued by the chairman's chart earlier about productivity. And it shows, as I read the numbers, and also as I read the numbers that you cited, Mr. Dubé, that if we just started in 1960, not the high water mark for minimum wage, but a good time on minimum wage. If we started in 1960 and we said that as productivity goes up, that is, as workers are producing more, then the minimum wage is going to go up the same. And if that were the case, the minimum wage today would be about $22 an hour. So my question, Mr. Dubé, with a minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, is what happened to the other $14.75? It sure didn't go to the worker.
So there we see Senator Warren tying it to productivity. Now, Brian, if you were on the other end of that microphone during that hearing, how would you respond to Senator Warren?
I would say she's averaging out the wrong things. You can't average that out and assume that that means every single worker is capable of producing $22 worth of value to their employer, and that if you set a legal minimum wage at that level, that's going to mean that people who can't produce that much to the employer are going to lose their jobs. And these are the lower skilled people, the very people who it's most important to have jobs to sort of get them on the ladder to employment. We don't see them. You know, this is one of the big problems with the empiricism of the minimum wage. We don't know who they are. We can only know they exist logically, and since they're not easy to see, they don't become politically important, which is why I do think we are going to see the minimum wage rise in the next year or two. It's going to hurt a lot of people, but we're not going to know who they are, and they're not going to be politically significant.
Sylvia or Michelle, do you have any responses to what Brian said?
Well, yes, if I could comment on that. First of all, you know, it's just simply not true that this very simplistic argument that if you increase the minimum wage, you're going to have job losses. Elizabeth Warren there in that clip was actually speaking to my colleague, Aaron Dubé, and we've done a paper together. We've done several papers that have come out of this institute here. And we've shown clearly that with the types of minimum wage hikes that we've seen in the last 20 years in the United States, and there's been a lot of variability across states, we simply do not see in the range of minimum wages that we have actually implemented in the United States, no job loss. So, that's just one of those things that has been constantly talked about and constantly kind of forwarded as an argument to not increase the minimum wage, but it simply isn't true. The other thing is that it's just not this idea that this productivity wage split only, affects those at the very bottom, that somehow the increases in productivity over the last several decades, those low-wage workers didn't increase productivity. The fact is that you have to go way up to the wage scale, because you see wage losses, real wage losses, that crawl up pretty far into the wage scale. So I don't think that is the reason why we don't see increases in wages, because certain workers aren't productive. That's just not what has been happening. It's just that low-wage workers just don't have the ability to go and ask for higher wages, especially when you have unemployment at the levels that we've had lately, and the low growth and the slow growth in employment, even during the good times. For instance, between 2001 and 2007, the labor markets are just too loose. Therefore, the minimum wage actually keeps wages artificially low. And that's why we don't see these job losses. And matter of fact, when you increase the minimum wage, a lot of good stuff happens, such as all the churning in the low-wage labor market actually stops and decreases quite a bit. And when you decrease the turnover, and for instance, like the restaurant industry, it's very high turnover, very costly turnover rates, you increase productivity, decrease the cost of turnover, and it can be a good thing for businesses.